All right, so we're at the bottom of 108b at the Mishnah. Heichon Pikdoni. Person gave a pikadon, something to watch another person, and he comes and demands it. Amar lo avad. The guy says it's been lost. So if it's been lost, he's not responsible for it. Mashbiachani. So the owner says, so take a shvua to that effect. And he agrees, takes the shvua. And then witnesses come along and say, you know what? It wasn't lost. You consumed it, right? You were posheya. And you actually owe it back to the original owner. Mishalim Karen. You pay the principal. But if you admit it of your own accord that you had lied, then you pay the 20% extra, and you have to bring an asham. That we've seen before. We've also seen this before. Hechan Pikdoni, person says, where's my Pikadon? You say it was stolen. And so you're off the hook. Mashbiachani. This makes you take a shua, and you agree. And witnesses then come along and say, yeah, you actually stole it. Then, as the thief, you pay double. But if you admit by yourself where the kefil doesn't apply, then then you pay the principal 1/5 for your misuse of the pikadon, and you have to bring the asham, the sacrifice. Third case, Hagozel is Aviv, and this is what the Gemara is going to focus on. Person steals from his father, Vinishbalo, and then you make a shvua that it was lost or stolen, whatever. You make a shvua that it's not your responsibility. And then the father dies. And then it turns out that there were witnesses that you actually misused it, and you were responsible for paying for it. But the father's now dead, and you are the heir, or at least one of the heirs. So then you pay the principal and the fine, the 20% fine, and you bring the asham and you pay it to your brothers, of the father's other sons, the other Yorshim. Or if there are no other sons. If you're the only son, then you pay to the father's brothers as the Yorshim, as the inheritors. And if you refuse, or maybe you don't even have the cash anymore, right? You've already gone through this item, you've consumed it, maybe you sold it, you spent the money, you don't have any money, you can't pay, love, so then you're required to borrow the money, and then the creditors can come and be repaid from your share. Okay, so the point seems to be that even if you have an ownership interest in it, you still have to give it back. The Gemara will make this clear. So like even the case of the lofa, like why borrow the money just so that it can just so that the money can be repossessed by your creditors. But the Gemara will get into that. So Gemara says, "B'chayav u'v'moso." If now, sorry, they're still in the Mishnah. Ha'omer livno. The person says to his son, "Konam iatanene mishali." I'm making a neder that you can't benefit from anything that I have. He makes Yerushalayim, then the father dies. The son still inherits him, because now you're not benefiting from the father. The father's dead. It's the estate, so the estate doesn't have never cut you out, as it were. It was the father himself who cut you out. Now that he's dead, you're not cut out anymore. But what if the neder says, the father says in the neder, you can't have any benefit from me even after I die? Then you can't inherit, and you have to give back your share of the inheritance to the father's other sons or to the father's brothers. And if you don't have the money, then you have to borrow it, and then the creditors can come and take their repayment from the property, from the estate. Okay, so Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef, Afilu Yarniki Shel Tzedakah. If you like, who do you pay back the money to? If the father died, and and now you've been shown to have been negligent with the property that was put in your trust, then Rabbi Yosef says, like, who do you give the money back to? You can even give it to tzedakah. Because, like, since you have an ownership interest, but you still have a requirement to repay it, so who you repay it to, you can even you can give it to somebody else. Amar Papa Amar Zegezalavi. But you have to say, according to Papa, you have to designate. You have to say, like, I'm not just giving to tzedakah. I'm using this opportunity to give tzedakah as a way to repay my father, as it were. Am I? So the Gemara says, well, why do you even have to go through all this? Why don't you just forgive yourself of the obligation, right? Like, the money is coming to you. You're the heir, so you can say I'm mochel on the obligation to repay the estate, right? Because I'm the estate. So why do you have to go through this exercise? Milotnan, and don't we have a Mishnah to back this up? Mochel al keren v'lo mochelo al chomesh. That if you steal something and you take a shvua that you didn't do it, and then you admitted that you did, so if the owner was mochel on the principal, he says, fine, don't pay me back, but you still have to pay back the penalty, right? The 20%. Then that's valid. So almost, so we see bar mechilahu, that you can forgive the debt. Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? There's two opinions. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is our Mishnah, says that you can is this additional source, right? The Mishnah that we just quoted, that you can forgive this obligation, and our Mishnah that says that you can't. That's Rabbi Akiva. Tanya, where do we see this dispute? Brisa says, if a person has no goel, all right, if you steal from someone who's then died, so who do you return it to? You return it to his heir. What if he has no heir? So the Torah says, if you don't have an heir, Hasham hamushav laHashem lakohen, right? Then you give it to the kohen. And we'll see a little more detail of that. But first, the Bryce asks, who has no relatives, right? Everybody's got some kind of relative. If you're part of the Jewish people, where did you come from? You have a distant cousin, you have ancestry, so you must have relatives. Ella begezel ager. It must be, we can only be talking about a ger. Now, the principle of a ger, of a convert, is that when you convert, you're legally seen to have no relatives. So even if you have a living father, mother, brothers, sisters, whatever, they are not legally related to you anymore, because you have been reborn, as it were, as a member of the Jewish people. So if you then subsequently don't have any children, then you have no heirs. So it's easy for a ger to not have heirs. So Haresha goes like ger. So if you steal from a ger, v'nishbalo v'shama shames a ger, and then you make an oath that you didn't steal, and then you heard that the ger died. V'hayamal, so then there's nobody to return it to. V'hayamal chaspo v'shama l'Yerushalayim, and you're bringing your money. You're going to give it to the kohanim, and you're going to bring your asham. You're bringing it up to Yerushalayim. Upagabo. So again, guess what? He's still alive. You meet him. It was a kafu olav b'milva. And then so you want to give the money back to the ger, and the ger says, you know what? Like, now's not a good time. I'm traveling. I might be robbed or whatever. For whatever reason, the ger says, don't pay me back now. You'll owe me the money, right? So now it's a loan. Umeis, and then the ger actually dies. So zacha hala b'ma shabiyado. So so you now owe a debt to a dead person with no relatives, right? So then Rabbi Yossi says, fine, it's yours. You don't know the person to whom you owed it is no longer exists, and there's no one else to give it back to. It belongs to you. Rabbi Kiva Omer, ein lo takana shios gzela miyado. No, you still have an obligation to return it to somebody, right? You've got to return. There has to be an act of returning it. So that's so that accords with our mission, right? That's Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili lo shna l'nafshe lo shna l'achering masi machel. So according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you can forgive this debt. Doesn't matter if it's to you or to other people. No, Rabbi Akiva says you can't forgive this obligation. You have to actually return it to somebody. Well, Rabbi Yossi, who adin da'afilu lo zakafu b'milva. And according to Rabbi Yossi, that even if it wasn't a loan, like we have this case where you meet the ger who you thought was dead, you want to give it back to him, and so he says, you'll pay me later, so it's a loan. But even if it's not a loan, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, right, if you owe it to him as an obligation to return it, then then you still have to, you're still off the hook. The liability is gone, right? Behind the katani is a couple. So why does the Brisa say this put in this extra detail that implies that only if it's now a loan can you forgive it? No, Rabbi Yossi says you could have forgiven it anyway. The only reason the Brisa puts it that way is to tell you that according to Rabbi Akiva, even if you transformed it into a loan, that hasn't discharged your obligation to make a return of the stolen property. Even though it's now no longer a stolen item, but it's a loan, nonetheless you haven't discharged your obligation to repay the loan. So all the more so if you hadn't turned it into a loan. Rav Sheshas asks about this distinction. Rabbi Yossi Aglili l'shmeina l'nafshe v'kol shechein la'acherim. So then, so the Mishnah, so the second Mishnah that we brought that shows that you can forgive the principal. So why doesn't it tell? It should tell us that that the guy who it was stolen from can forgive the obligation to himself, right? And then we would know that certainly he can forgive the obligation to somebody else, right? And Rabbi Akiva, and according to Rabbi Akiva, which is our Mishnah, so why doesn't it tell us that you can't forgive the obligation to others? And then we would understand that certainly if you can't forgive the obligation to others, you could certainly not forgive it to yourself, right? So Rabbi Sheshas doesn't like the way we explain the difference between our Mishnah and the other Mishnah, because it's not stated right. Like according to Rav Sheshas, then the cases in the Mishnah should have been more specific, and should have been to the more extreme. So Rabbi Akiva should have the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Akiva, which is our Mishnah, should have specified one side of the one case, which would imply the other case, and same with the other Mishnah. And Rav Sheshas says no. Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Both Mishnahs here are according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili that you can be mocha. But Kikam Rabbi Yossi Aglili Damasi Mocha. But when is that the case? Lacherim. You can only forgive a debt that you owe to somebody else, right? Or that is owed to you by somebody else. I'm sorry, right? So the original owner, yes, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he can be mochel. He can say, you know what, you don't have to pay me back, but he can't say that to himself. You can't say it to yourself, right? You can't say, I'm letting myself off the hook of returning it. No, you still have to undergo that process. Why is it that the guy gets to keep what he has? He doesn't have to return it. Mishum, there's a kafan love b'milva. That's why we're saying that you met the ger. He said, "Don't pay me back now. Let's make it a loan. You pay me back later." That's why you could. That's only in that case can you not repay it. But if it's still returning of a stolen object, then you would still have to repay it. And Rava says you could explain it differently. You could say Hava Rabbi Akiva. Both of these Mishnayos are like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, when do you have to return the stolen item and you can't forgive the debt? You can't forgive it. That's only if you're trying to let yourself off the hook. No, we don't allow that. But if you want to let somebody else off the hook, that's okay. So Michlal, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Savar, Afil Nafshe, Nami Matzi Machil. So that implies that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you can even let yourself off the hook. Ella, so that doesn't seem to make sense. Um, so if that's the case, how can you have a case that the Torah puts to us that if you steal from someone with no relatives, which we understand to be a ger, um, so how can what's the case where the Torah says you have to repay it to the Kohanim? Because why don't you, according to Rabbi Yossi Glili, just forgive yourself, right? Just let yourself off the hook, and then you don't have to give it to anybody. So there has to be a case where you can't. So it has to be this is a case where you cannot let yourself off the hook, and that's why the Torah has to say, you can do with the money, you can give it to the Kohanim. So Amarava Hachamayaskina, what are we talking about? Kishagazol Sager, Vinishbalo, Umes Hager, Vahoda Lacharmisa. We're talking about a case where you stole from a ger, you made a shvua that you didn't steal from, and then the ger dies, and then you feel bad and you say, you know what, that was a false shvua. He was right in the first place. I actually stole from him. But now he's dead. The beidna the ode kano Hashem and the son lekonim. The ger is not there anymore. Like when you admitted and when the penalty became payable, there was nobody to pay it to, right? It's a different story than if you owed it to the ger and then the ger died, right? Then you can say, okay, now my obligation is gone. It's now on me, and I forgive myself, right? But if there was never any ger to give it back to, and you still have a problem that you're liable for theft, you've just admitted it. So that's the case where the Torah says you have to give it to the Kohanim. Okay. By Ravina. What if the ger is a female? Well, what should be the difference? Isha Marachman of Lo Isha. The Torah says, Im ein la ish goel, if the man has no relative, right? In this case of stealing from a ger. So does man mean specifically man to exclude woman? Or Odilma Urchidikrohu, maybe that's just, that's the way Hebrew is, right? It sometimes uses the male construction to include everybody, right? Only Rav Aaron Ravina. Rav Aaron said to Ravina, Tashma, let's prove it. Titania, we have a brisa, Ish, Ein Liel Ish, Isha Minayin. Here's a brisa that says specifically that Ish will only mean if you steal from a male ger. What about if you steal from a female ger? How do you know what the ruling is? Kishu Hamushav Harikan Shnayim. So when the Torah says Yimen Ish Goel, if the man has no relative, the man you stole from has no relative, Hasham Hamushav Lashem Lakohen, then the penalty that you pay that is returned to God goes to the Kohen, right? So there's an extraordinary that is returned, Hamushav. That comes to include everybody, Harikan Shnayim. So actually, it shows that, yes, if it only had said from the word ish, we would have understood it only applies to a male ger, but then the Torah comes and says, and also to a female ger. So what do you need in the first place, right? Like, don't say ish, right? It's not excluding a woman; it's excluding a katan, a minor, right? If the person is age of majority, he's a legal person, then you have to, it's your responsibility to see if he has any relatives. Like a ger could have relatives; he could have children, right? So it's your responsibility to see if there are any relatives. But katan, but if the ger is a katan, is a minor, and then he can't have children by virtue of the fact that he's not mature. So he couldn't possibly have children. You don't have to check if he has relatives. And then it's not. Okay. Which would seem kind of obvious, right? So I'm not sure why the Gemara thinks that this is needed to be stated by an extra word in the Torah. But I suppose there could be exceptions. So the idea seems to me that if the ger that you stole from is a minor, then you can assume that he has no children by virtue of the fact that he's a minor. Okay. Tana Rabban. Ramisat Lashem Lakoin. In the same passage, right? Hashem Hamushav LaHashem, the what's returned to God goes to the Kohen. Kano Hashem on the son Lakoin Shabos Mishmar, meaning God, as it were, takes possession and gives it out to the Kohanim in that mishmar, in that shift. So, as you probably recall, there are a lot of Kohanim. They split them up into 24 groups, each one called a mishmar, and they each did 2 weeks of service in the per year. And then the holidays were for everybody. So for all the Kohanim. So whoever is on that week's shift, when you go to return it, that's the guy who gets it. That's who God is giving it to, as it were. How do you know that? Maybe you could just give it to any Kohen. When it says in the Torah, besides the El HaKippurim, the sacrifice of Yom Kippur, which is brought for kapara. So we're talking about, I'm sorry, not Yom Kippur. This is the asham, sorry, the asham that is designed to give this thief his kapara. So obviously, who's going to take care of that? The Kohen on that shift, right? So then the whole thing applies, not only who brings the sacrifice in the temple, that's the Kohen from that shift, but also the returning of the money goes to the Kohen on that shift. Okay. Tanarabah, Rabbi Saad, Harisha goes a Kohen. What if you steal from a Kohen? No, sorry, no, you didn't steal from a Kohen. The Kohen is the thief, right? If a Kohen is the thief, and now he has to give it back to a Kohen. Well, I'm a Kohen, so give it back to myself, so maybe I don't have to do anything, right? So how do you know you can't do that? Vidinu, and it should be allowed by logic. Like, if you, the Kohen, you can, if somebody else was a thief and had to pay back and can give it to you, and you can acquire it from somebody else, you can certainly acquire it from yourself. So Rabbi Nassan Omer, Rabbi Nassan put the problem in a little bit different way. What about like something that, when do you have rights on it? When the thief gives it to you as a Kohen, right? Before that, you had no ownership interest in it. So in that case, once you, the Kohen, acquire it, it's yours. You have full ownership of it. Now, but what if you yourself are the thief? So you already have possession of the item, so you have some kind of interest in it, right? So certainly you should be allowed to keep it. So certainly, like, how can some other Kohen come and demand it from you? You already have some interest in it, and you're a Kohen. So Gemara says, "Lo, no, we don't go that way." So why is this not a good logical construct? Because when it comes to something that you have no interest in it, like it's somebody, a third party is the thief and comes and gives it to you as the Kohen, nobody else has an interest in it either, right? Then when the guy comes and says, I have to give it to Kohen, gives it to you, now you acquire it, right? But Tomer Bergazel. But what about the other case where you yourself are the thief? Sure, you have some interest in it, but so do other people have interest in it. It's not really yours until this transaction takes place. You actually have to give it up, and it gets it can be distributed to all of the other Kohanim on the shift. Vaksiv Vishas Kadashav Lo Yiyu, but doesn't the Torah say every Ishas Kadashav Lo Yiyu, everyone has his interest in his kashim and his sanctified things, and then it continues Isha Asher Yitain La Kohen Lo Yiyeh, whatever someone gives to the Kohen belongs to that Kohen. So like, once you get something, it's not distributed to anybody else, right? To the other Kohanim, right? So just like you have, um, so when it comes to the carbon, who gets the share in the carbon? Which Cohen gets it? The one that happens to be the guy who's on that shift and who is picked to do that carbon, right? So it's the same. Shouldn't it be the same for the money, right? If we can designate just this one Cohen who benefits from the edible part of the sacrifice, we don't say everybody in the shift gets a piece of it. No, the Kohen that brings it, Isha Yitain Kohen Lo Yeh, applies to the sacrifice. It should also apply to the money. So our answer is we're talking about a Kohen who is Tame. So the idea that he gets to eat the sacrifice that was brought, like now that he's Tame, he can't eat it, right? So if that's the case, then he's no longer entitled to the money either. So Iba Kohen Tame Davar Sheyesh Lo Chelik Bo Mi Yislay. So wait, so if he was Tame, how did he even get? How did like the logical idea that you tried to promote that he has a piece of it, he doesn't have a piece of it because he's Tame. He's excluded from anything to do with the carbon. So El Asya Lakoin Misteachusa. So we need another source to tell us why he doesn't have any right to the money. It's a Gzera Shava, a similar phrasing that is borrowed from Sidei Achuza, that from what you do with an ancestral field. Okay, so what's the case of Sidei Achuza? If you own some land, right? It's your ancestral land. And the Yovel rules apply. That basically you're always going to keep it in your family, even if you lease it or sell it out to somebody else. The Yovel comes back to you. What if you give it to Hekdesh, right? You sanctify it. And so the rule is up until Yovel, it can be redeemed. Once Yovel occurs and you haven't redeemed it yet, then then it can be, it now belongs to the Kohen. Okay. And here's the Brisa. And we'll see how we apply it to our case. Titania, we have Brisa. Achuzaso, matam lomar. Imiste achuzaso, if it's the field of your ancestral properties. What does the Torah mean? Minayin l'sada hayotza l'kohanim biyovel ugala acha min hakohanim. If you have this field, nobody redeemed it by Yovel time. It's been given to the temple treasury, and no one's redeemed it. And now it's Yovel, so it goes to the Kohanim. Ugala echad min hakohanim, and then one of the Kohanim. What if before Yovel it was redeemed by one of the Kohanim? Right? Somebody else comes along and redeems it from Yovel. Since it would have gone anyway to Kohanim at Yovel. Now I own it because I redeemed it. Right? So I'm not going to give it back to ordinarily you'd say it goes back to the owner at Yovel, like any other field, right? But the Kohen says, well, it would have, if I hadn't redeemed it, it would be mine anyway. So that I redeemed it, it should certainly be mine. I paid for it, right? So it should certainly still be mine. So how do we know we don't say that? Vidin, and the Gemara says Vidinhu, it's logical. Like, if I waited till Yovel, then the field belonging to this other person would have passed completely to me forever, right? Now that I have an ownership interest in it because I redeemed it before Yovel, now I should have to give it up because I bought it. That makes no sense. So Talmud Lomar. So therefore, the Torah says, "Kistei hacherim lakohen tiyachuzaso." It's like a stei hacher, like a field that was consecrated. It belongs to the Kohen. So, which tells you that that if it's achuzah shelo ve'enzo shelo, that you know what you get to keep as a Kohen, something that's passed down to you from your ancestors, but not something that you redeemed in the case that we just described. Ketzad yotza mitachas yado mislachim kol echav hakohanim. So who gets the field? So you remove it from the possession of the Kohen who redeemed it, and now who does it belong to? Well, it hadn't been redeemed by the owner before Yovel, so it's now the property of all the Kohanim. It gets split among all the Kohanim. Okay, so we will stop here for today.
How does
And
the Kohen
tomorrow,
get to redeem it?
I'm sorry.
On what right does this Kohen come to be able to redeem a
Well, that's
field
the rule
that doesn't part of his family?
that anybody can redeem it from Hekdesh, with the proviso that then it goes back to the owner at Yovel.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
Okay, I'm not going to be available tomorrow, so David is going to fill in for me tomorrow.
Can you
So,
tell what's the case? I'm sorry, what's the case with the katan? Doesn't the katan only become a ger at the time of bar mitzvah? How does a katan become a ger?
ooh, good question.
I
How
thought
does a
there's
katan
a
become a
Gemara in
ger?
Ketubah, right, which says ger matbilin ayedei beitin, and it's only chal when he becomes he can always refuse. Let's say his family makes him a ger, he can refuse at the time he's bar mitzvah.
Good question. But then, like, what's his status in the meantime?
I don't know.
Until such time as he refuses, then his gerus is valid.
But he's not bar mitzvah yet. He's not mechuyev in
Yeah,
mitzvah. How
no,
does he
who knows?
become
But he still has sounds like he still has ownership rights. All right, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, but does a katan have ownership rights? I think you say yes. I mean, sometimes those are superseded by those of his father. But if he has no father because he's a ger, no legal father because he's a ger, um, then I guess it sounds like he has ownership rights like anybody else. Otherwise, people could just go around stealing from minors who are gers.
How did he acquire it? How did he from whom did he inherit it then? How did he buy it?
Maybe
I mean, did he
he
inherit?
earned money and bought it. I mean, generally with a katan, we say if he earns something, it belongs to his father. But here again, there's no father. So then who would you say it belongs to? So sounds like a katan with no relatives or no father, maybe. Um, why would you take away his ownership right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm just not sure how he became the ger though. Through a beit din. He went on his own, decided to become a ger.
Another good question. Um,
I don't know.
I guess it doesn't really matter. As you say, he has to affirm his gerus when he achieves the age of majority. But in the meantime, what's his status? It sounds like he's a valid ger. Yeah, good question.
All
That's
right.
all I got. I don't know any more details of that, but yeah. All right. Have a good day.
Okay. Good day.